This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 463, featuring Sibley Bacon, applied researcher and functional artist who studies team execution effectiveness. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vaselopulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we study leaders. And you can find all past episodes at theleadershippodcast.com. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Darley. Darley's mission supports all our military and first responders with the equipment they need to ensure mission success, whether that's a water pump, a drone, or emergency medical supplies. Learn more about this great company and the people supporting our nation's heroes at darley.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
Yeah, and today we have a very special guest introduced to us by another good friend of the show and a good friend of mine, Justin Walker. We have Sibley Bacon joining us. Sibley, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here.
Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit about her. She's an applied researcher and functional artist whose work focuses on improving team execution effectiveness. She's developed a set of practical tools to address 90% of the issues that undermine team and business sustainability. Really interesting stuff. We've had the chance to speak before. And what's really unique about Sibley is when we ask the question, what's not in the public bio, there's not much in the public bio. Tell us, Sibley.
Well, yeah, I guess it starts with my name. So when your name is Sibley, and if your name is Sibley Bacon, there aren't that many. So my name was a big deal. My parents were very specific about it, and I was told to never change it. And I learned very early on that, when kids go through like a graffiti phase or something, no. So I learned from maybe, elementary school that I needed to be very mindful about my public persona because of my name.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And you mentioned your parents. And when we spoke, again, leading up to this, they're obviously a profound influence on you in your life. And so you have these two parents who were artistic in nature, and you can tell us a little bit about them. But, you end up going into math and science and software engineering. So it's like, a left turn, but not really a left turn. You even promised to tell your parents, and I love this, that you promised them that you would approach things as an artist. Tell us about your journey.
Yeah, well, my mother was a classical singer, so she was a soprano. And my father was an abstract sculptor and painter, and he also did functional art. So functional art, things like ceramics, that I call it elegant tools for mundane tasks. What I was taught by them is that to be an artist, that's the point of living, because that's what, as my mother said, countries are remembered for their art and their literature and their music and their food. And so it was, if you're not doing art, what is the point of being alive? And oh, by the way, to be an artist requires profound structure and discipline and a bar of excellence. So if you think about classical singing as an art form, there's so much technical expertise that goes into that. And the same thing is true for ceramics, large scale ceramic sculpture. There's tremendous amount of math and science that goes into being able to create these things. So the expectation for me was that I was to apply myself to the best of my ability, and it included all the things. So it wasn't like artist versus science math. It's, for my family, especially my mother's side of the family, the bar was exceptionally high. So my great aunt got a PhD in chemistry in 1935 from Columbia.
Wow.
So when I was 9 years old, my mother was asking me where I was going to graduate school. Not lying. I mean, I remember it. I looked up and I went, and my answer was, I think I need to get through high school first. She said, but your Aunt Marnie has a PhD in chemistry. and was at the forefront of research in how we absorb vitamins. In particular, vitamin A was that was her area of focus.
Toxic.
So there was this bar of all the women in the family have graduate degrees. Here's what the expectation of you. And I'm like, okay. So I have to apply myself, and I am a voracious learner. So I have the capacity to learn anything if I apply myself well enough and stay open to the possibility. And so nothing was out of bounds. And both my parents were structure, discipline, work, excellence. Go.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
You know, I like the background because people don't realize how much structure and discipline there is within the arts. But there were some specific things that kind of steered you towards your career choices. Was there a specific event or a series of events that kind of like really shaped your direction?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll never forget the day. I was very interested in math and science and logic. It's interesting to me. So I was at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I was trying to figure out what to major in. And I was kind of standing in the middle of this plaza area on campus. And I just looked at all the humans and I went, digital storage of data. Humans keep creating humans. That's been happening.
Mhm.
And we're not going to go, we're not going to be going into trees more and more. We're going to be going into digital storage of data more and more. So this was 1982. So we were still at the very early stages of computing at scale. And I just thought that if I understood the digital storage of data, that I would always be able to keep a roof over my head. I would have food in my belly and I would be able to care for myself. And that was my goal. And I had no idea that it would end up with mainframes in your pocket. I didn't think about it. I just thought this is the path and all I have to do is understand digital storage of data. So that's what I set out to do.
Well, I can tell you in 1982, I was not thinking about, about digital storage. That's the year I met my wife. So it's all about you, Sibley. So your dad said to you once, one thing about being an artist is you have to see everything. You want to move people emotionally. Is this what's meant by being a functional artist?
Well, I think that is being an artist, period. Because my mother also was very clear to me, like, okay, you need to be able to project emotion to the back row with no mics, because in opera there was no microphone. So it was like it doesn't matter if you do your work exceptionally well if you don't move anybody in the process. And so whatever you do, it's an art form, it's an expression of your being. So I would say a functional artist takes that energetic force and that intention and says, can I provide you with an object that enables you to do something that makes something a mundane task, which a lot of work is, and makes it a more elegant experience in a way. So I think the moving people is that it's feeling everything. It's seeing everything. It's like the way I remember he said it to me. It's like you have to absorb it all into you. As you're integrating it through your own family history, through your own living history, through the environment that you're in. And then you produce something unique that people take note of.
Yeah.
And he was very like, it's not your job about whether or not they like it or not. It's about that they think about it.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, people familiar with my work know I talk about direction, pace, and tone when it comes to leadership. And that tone really refers to how do you want people to feel when they're being led by you. I always say, hey, we want you to be authentic, but there is a performative component to leadership. And it doesn't mean being fake and phony, but we need for people to think, know, understand, feel things, and we need to be intentional, deliberate. is, when you talk about the discipline as an artist, are you thinking, hey, I don't care what they feel as long as they feel something? Or are you being deliberate and saying, I want them to feel sad, joy, happiness, humor? I mean, is it intentional?
Well, yes, there's a lot of intention there because when you're leading a team, it's really John Madden. I loved what he said of, as a professional football coach, he said, you have to know which players need you to pat their ass, which players do you need to smack their ass, and which players do you need to wipe their ass. And you got to know who needs what when. And then you got to get the combination working so you win because you want to win championships. So for me, it's all about when I was in a leadership capacity, it's how do you motivate people to get them moving in the direction you need them to move in. So it's really about managing perceptions of self, perceptions of team, perceptions of you as a leader. And I found that it really starts with love. That I always, and I would say that probably 95 to 97% of the people that I managed in my career were men because of the nature of the work that I was doing. So I always say I love my guys. I love my team. And I always say not HR creepy love, athletic team sport love. That when you love your team and your team knows that you love them and you are doing everything that you possibly can to support their creative success, they perform better. And it's a team. It's this constantly, I'm going to do everything I can to clear a path for you and get out of the way. That's what I do. Clear a path, get out of the way. Clear a path, get out of the way. And for me as an infrastructure engineering leader, it was clear a path for the business, clear a path for everybody who's a stakeholder of my team. And that defines clearing a path for my team because they're the lowest level, essentially. They're that low level. So I got to clear that entire path out for them so that they can do strategic innovation.
Yeah. I was struck by your combination, an elegant combination of, let's say, this idea of like art and the humanity of what we do, the results oriented, competitive kind of nature, that you present. Like you're like, I have a goal. We're going to achieve that goal. And kind of this, I think very mature kind of corporate understanding of like, hey, here are all the needs, stakeholders. Like I got to exist within a bureaucracy and in a world that, has constraints. So when you were at Google, a lot of your work at Google is working on human dynamics and improving team execution and effectiveness. I'm kind of curious. I want to learn more about that. But was that something like an organization going like, hey, Sibley, can you help with this? Because we're having this problem. Or was it you just going, I see a problem, I'm going to fix it, and I'm going to address it because it's in my best interest, the best interest of the team that I love? I mean, where did that passion start?
Well, that basically team execution effectiveness to support business sustainability, that is my art form. So it's kind of like a yes and yes. I come into a building, I do my work, I do my art form. And then as I'm doing it, people kind of go, hey, can you do that over here? Or can you help me with this? Or what about that problem? Because I do this wherever I go. And I have to say, too, I want a huge amount of gratitude to Dave Duffield, who was the founder of PeopleSoft and founder of Workday. I always tell people I went to the Dave Duffield School of the Business of Software Engineering. And so I think that's where I really learned about connecting those dots and how do you be a vendor for the Global 2000 and what responsibilities go with that, especially if you're in infrastructure for the Global 2000. And so I think that having spent half my career in his companies, surrounded by just stellar people I learned so much from, I just kept applying it everything is weaving in. I'm always learning and growing. Anybody who knows I'm a voracious learner, I'm always learning and growing. I always told people, if you don't want to learn and grow, you don't want to work on my team. It's real simple. So I would say at Google, there was me doing my work and then getting asked to focus in different areas as well. If that answers your question. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting topic and it's complex and there's all kinds of things, going around. And I'm curious as you look at, let's say, cultures and you look at kind of like how they operate, do certain cultures make it easier to get this kind of learning culture and change? Do certain cultural elements make it tougher? What makes this type of, let's say, team building chemistry work? And what are the things that keep it from working? So that as practitioners who are listening are going like, okay, here's the kind of chemistry I want to look for. Here's what I want to be aware of that might get in the way of, because I don't think anyone's going to be out there saying like, oh, I want to have a weak team and I want to have a, low performance team. Everyone wants what you do. What are the conditions that allow it to thrive and grow? What are the conditions that kind of like hold it back?
Well, I think it would be if you don't have a clear understanding of what working, how you define it's working, define what success is. I think there's a lot of those basic fundamentals of having a clear understanding of what the mission is and what the rules of engagement are, and then go. And so I think that it really, if you look at some of the different companies that I've worked for, what that end goal is different. And so it's always working.
Mm-hmm.
It's always working. It's just whether or not it's working the same. And I think that's where there are differences. Certainly Google has a very academic culture, or it did when I was there, which was very different than being in a very hardcore business culture. And I think one of the complexities that I experienced at Google was, for me, coming from the family I come from, coming from the businesses that I worked for, and just growing up in DC, uh, that kind of very focused on business execution in a sustainable way, that you never ever waste for the sake of wasting or spend more than you need to. And you be very mindful of that. So there was always so much around conservation of resources. Whereas at Google, there was an abundance of resources. And so they really were giving people tremendous creative freedom. And so it's tremendous creative freedom within the context of a publicly traded company.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an interesting mix to do, because the rules of Wall Street are the rules of Wall Street. And if you don't know what they are, it's just a matter of time before you get to find out. Because when the business steps in, and as somebody who was always in engineering and wanting all that creative space, creating that creative space for my teams, I had to understand, how do you navigate the business aspects of things. And so I think that was something in a purely academic culture that can be somewhat jarring. And it's an interesting line to navigate.
As you're talking, it makes me think of a topic we've referenced a number of times and a guest we've had on the show and a book we've referenced a number of times. But Safi Bacall wrote the book Loon Shots. And it's this great book about like managing innovation, managing creativity, managing everything. And as I'm hearing you talk about this, all I can think about is like, you're talking about this world that is very disciplined, as you described art, from your experience with your parents, but it had discipline and rigor around it to kind of channel it. And I think in Safi's book, he talks about there needs to be that space where creativity is unconstrained, but then there needs to be a focus at some point to channel it and have it go somewhere. And he talks about that liminal space between those two worlds that is so difficult to manage, where you're almost like halfway between ice and water. You're kind of in this slush. And that is that, maybe that line that you're describing that says like, here's how we can allow people to be, creative, but then at some point we got to channel this somewhere. It's got to go somewhere. And that, I think, is that tough part to manage that maybe, you've kind of figured out a little bit.
Well, I did the best I could, certainly, and I made so many mistakes. I mean, whenever I teach classes with executive education program at the Haas School of Business, I always say, I'll give you 599 ways not to do something, and I'll give you the one that did work. And so I think that there's, now that as I think about it, where we are with artificial intelligence and quantum computing and neural networking, I think that Google's culture really was what I call starburst innovation, as opposed to point A to point B
Hmm.
innovation. Now, both are strategic innovation. If you're going to create quantum computing, take it out of the mind's ability to do quantum computing and neural networking and get it out into tools that you can use, how do you create an environment where that sort of innovation can happen? And so you kind of have to have innovation happening in every discipline you can possibly think of simultaneously. And so you bring so many PhDs from around the entire planet, and you have them all do their best top education mind simultaneously, all in these different directions. And I think it lends itself to, because you're seeing quantum computing and neural networking happening live around you. And so that's that environment. That's a very different kind of innovative environment compared to like a very strategic, this is our market sector, this is our time frame, these are the rules of this market sector. So I think as a leader, it's understanding which environment you're in. And I will fully admit, I struggled quite a bit at Google trying to make sense of it all.
Mhm.
And so now I can sit back and go, oh, it was the AI development.
Hmm.
Oh, okay. Now I understand why we had so many disciplines represented inside the building, and it was global. I get it now as I look at, and AI's in its infancy. I
Yes.
love having conversations with Gemini, which is Google's AI.
Oh.
I enjoy it.
This is an interesting conversation, and you are absolutely brilliant, but you are also very humble, and I appreciate that. And speaking of humility, one of the most humble businesses out there is our sponsor, Darley. They do so much good work for the U.S. military, and they're the family-owned business in America's Midwest, and they do great work for our first responders, law enforcement, and the military around the globe. You can learn more about them at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So Sibley, you've said that when you approach things as an art form, it, instead of a job, it changes everything. And we know that engagement around the world is very low for a multitude of reasons. And I made a comment today with a group I was doing a workshop with, and I said, part of being a leader is being willing to negotiate. I mean, we have expectations, we have direction we need to provide, but I think we need to be willing to negotiate with people so that they buy in. And that might sound, like crazy talk, but the executive in the room that sponsored the workshop said, I really agree. I think we've got to slow down. And I'm wondering if you see that, as a part of an art form, the idea of negotiating to improve engagement.
Yes, I mean, very much so. I think that notion of having to slow down, I used to say we need to go as fast as we possibly can, as slowly as possible. And I now, especially with Gen Z, Gen A's coming up, and where we are with a global computing infrastructure, I think we need to go as slowly as we possibly can, as fast as possible. So it's that art of deceleration so that we can meet their neurologies where they are.
Mm.
Now, this is just my perspective based on my life experience and nothing more. I really do think we've had a neurological evolutionary event occur with the Gen Zs in particular, and then the alphas even more. So how we engage with people coming into the workforce now has got to be from a perspective of their neurologies, not ours. So I think that was I think it was like 2014 when I got to see where computing, because you get to see these things 10 years before they actually hit the market, before they're actually out there. And I went, oh my God,
Mm.
I can't wait for the Gen Zs to come into the workforce, because their minds are going to be preloaded with all of these different capabilities because of how their neurology is developed within the context of the internet. They don't know
Yeah.
what the before times were. They don't know from not having a phone in your pocket. They just don't know. And that's a neurology that is.
Yeah.
And so what I found was that a lot of people were getting mad at, it started with millennials, and I go, they're our children.
Hmm.
We raise them. So let's look at how we raise them and the things that we raise them with and kind of go meet them where they are. So I love engaging with Gen Zs and alphas with that knowing. And so it's just how you pose the question. So instead of saying you need to come in 5 days a week, say, what would motivate you to be here?
Mm-hmm.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated are you by being around other humans? Because a lot of neurological differences, I used to have people that I would send home to be more productive and people that I would say you have to be in the building to be more productive.
Yeah.
And so I guess it related to that. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, where my mind's going is, again, the word that's in my mind as you're speaking is adaptable.
Yeah.
We need employees to be adaptable. Everything's changing. At the same time, we need leaders to be adaptable. And I'm going back to the whole artist thing. I can see, I'm not an artist, but I can see an artist saying, this is the way I do it. I can see an artist being very rigid, in their beliefs, and maybe some of them not having an open mind. Maybe that's an unfair bias. But I'm wondering if artists, that are free thinking and creative, need to make sure they're adaptable to the whole environment and seeing and hearing and smelling and feeling everything that's going on, so that they can best influence toward specific goals and objectives.
Well, yeah, I think that there's that from an artistic perspective, you have periods. Like, well, Taylor Swift just showed the Eras tour.
Who?
Who?
Yeah,
Who?
I know.
Yeah. If you missed the Federal Reserve's statement, I'll never forget, that came across the business press that the Federal Reserve said, you might want to take notice of this person. And I went, what? I said, wait a minute, did the Federal Reserve just do that? So I think that you have periods of work, and every artist who's been an artist for a length of time, you're constantly creating, you're always moving through. And so for some people it's perfecting, it's getting it, some artists focus on one thing and it's that precision of that one thing. And that is the art form. And then other artists are adapting and adapting and adapting because they're kind of a reflection of whatever's current and putting their twist on it. So I think to be a leader means adapting to every single one of the people on your team as their lives are dynamic. How they need you to support them today is different than how you support people 10 years later. Yeah. So I think adaptability is absolutely paramount, and to always be a step ahead of every single person in your organization so you can support their career growth. And I always want to be able to stretch people outside their comfort zone so that they can learn and grow. And that requires an extraordinary amount of work on my part, but I love to learn. So for me, it's just fun. I mean, it becomes a game for me of, can I stay a step ahead? So I'm always clearing a path and doing that thing that nobody in a million years thinks I'm capable of doing if you look at me on paper.
Hmm.
Like, this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, aha, you know?
Yep.
I hope that answers your question.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to date myself with a couple stories, but I remember being like at a store once and, the connection for processing credit cards wasn't working. And they're just like, oh, we can't take credit cards. And then older worker behind the counter said, sure, we can. They brought out that little thing with the swipe thing with the carbon paper in it. And they're like, yeah, we can take credit cards. Don't worry about it. Or times when in more recent years, been to a restaurant or somewhere and you're taking cash and you're working with a younger worker and the cash machine isn't working. They're like, well, we can't take credit cards. Okay. Can you take cash? I can't because I can't make the change, and you're frustrated. Like, let me just tell you, here's what the change should be. Give me this. And so we've got this neurology that, and I like the way you kind of address this. We've got this newer neurology, but then we've got an older neurology that, might be a little more resilient based on like understanding how things used to happen before we got dependence on technologies. And then you've got this like third neurology, which is like AI, which we don't even know what it is yet. Like we don't even know what like that thing, how it thinks, how it works, and it's evolving and changing every day. What are your thoughts on how we get all these going together? Because I think there's benefit of like commingling of ideas from different generations, and yet we tend not to be that great at it. What are your thoughts in this area?
I guess the thing that comes to mind first and foremost is that all of, you can't really hold software in your hands. So it's just electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to remember that. And so I would look to indigenous cultures, honestly, about a continuity of what is real. The earth is real. You are born on the earth. You have a physical body. You have emotions. You have a mind. And then you have a spiritual connection to everything that exists. And that's common across human cultures. And I think indigenous cultures in particular don't get lost up in the stratosphere because you're always rooted in the ground. And so I think that was another thing of just being raised in the neighborhood that I was raised in, was you never, ever, ever let go of your roots in the ground. I was raised in a neighborhood right outside Northeast DC, in the 70s in particular. It was just awesome, funkadelic. And it was at first it was a Jewish neighborhood, so I got a Jewish education, and then it was an African American neighborhood, and I got an African American education. Tremendous privilege to learn about how to plant your feet in the ground and stay rooted in what is real and never forget. And you're always paying it forward to the next generation and the next generation. So I was raised with, it was my absolute responsibility to always reach back and always open a door. Because it's not about any one of us. It's about the collective moving forward. And so I was going to do everything I possibly could to fulfill that expectation. And so I think that the thing that I've been doing lately is saying a lot about, I'm just interviewing to be a good ancestor. So I want to do everything I possibly can to increase the likelihood that our grandchildren will have grandchildren, and that they will look back upon us and say, we had very low expectations, but then they turned and they really shifted and they were able to adapt. I asked a Gen Z, this was another one of my research elements, was I was asking Gen Zs, if there was one thing that my generation could do on behalf of your generation, what would it be? And I got this from two of them. That was honestly just die. And I went, I said, we are not adding value in a way that you experience it as value. I'm on it. And that just changed everything for me in a lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Wow.
Sibley, you've mentioned the generations, and just to review, we've got the silent generation. There's still some people in the workforce from the silent generation. You got the boomers born 46 to 64. You got Gen X, millennials, which are also called Gen Z. Then you've got Gen A, and behind them, being born right now, are where they're calling for now. I think they're going to change it, but Generation Beta. So you've got all these, and you've made some comments about Gen A, and I'm wondering what you're thinking with regard to the tech world, being an artist, being outside the environment, being a steward. What perspectives do you have with these years that you've lived in your perspective? And we're advancing, and some people would say we're not. How would you sum this all up for what we as stewards need to do for the people coming up behind us?
Um,
It's a big question. Sorry.
well, I think that it's in line with a project that I've really been working on for the last like 5 years or so, which is a balance to Wall Street. So we have a global cash economy. It is digital. So we've put so much of our reality is in the digital realm. So how do we create balance in such a way that it's not just all profit up to the right? Those basic securities, I think that's the thing we really need to focus on, is that all human beings on the planet need oxygen, and all human beings need shelter, and they need access to food and water and a mechanism for tending to their well-being, an opportunity to learn and grow, and then add values to their communities and also work to secure those securities. And so I think what we're seeing right now is that I think it's not an either or, it's a both and. So I call it a small business market exchange where it's focused on prudent reserve. And I think that that is something that the alphas and the Gen Zs in particular, are like clamoring for something like this, which is, how do you, instead of just profit, 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 which is that's its own thing, is get them back down to the simple things of being connected to the earth, and how do they take all of their knowledge and all their AI capabilities and quantum computing, neural networking, all kinds of parallel processing, that their brains are almost preloaded with these capabilities, and now apply it to what is actually real, because you know what's real. Gravity tells you all the time what is real. So I think it's, how do we start to create that balance so that Wall Street and the global cash economy based on these markets has sustainability, has a chance to survive, because it's just up and to the right. It's like profit, 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 and I think that we need some balance. And if we create that balance, I think I think that's going to help us tremendously across the generations.
Yeah.
This is an absolutely fascinating discussion, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And you're a unique thinker, and what I really appreciate is how you bring disparate worlds together and try and find that, what works. Is there anything you want to leave us with, maybe a closing thought or even a challenge for our listeners?
I want to say thank you so much. Thank you. And, I think the thing that struck me so much was when you said I was humble, because I would say that has been the hardest thing for me to work towards to get, because I always joke of, I was born a Leo, and I am the year of the dragon. And in Tarot, I'm a pure emperor, and I was born in Texas. And I always say that doesn't set you up for humility. And so I kind of think of this as an opportunity to make a living amends to everybody who experienced me as everything but humble. It was a long road to get to here. So I can't thank you enough for giving me this opportunity. And yeah, I look forward to always continuing the conversation because it's wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Sibley. You've given us and our listeners a lot to think about. So we thank you. We thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so
And,
much.
and for our listeners, as you always hear us say at the end of our podcast, that's all we have for you this week. But we will include ways for you to connect with Sibley in our show notes. So make sure you visit us at theleadershippodcast.com. And again, remember, and again, I will remind you, these quotes always come from Jim. Jim is the master of the quotes, so I get to read it today. Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. Pablo Picasso.
Happy April Fool's Day.
Yeah. That was great.
Thanks for
That's a
listening
wrap.
to the
That was
Leadership
awesome.
Podcast.
Thank you.
To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.